Alright guys, welcome back. We are up to topic 4.3, Politics and Regional Interests. And today we're going to look at things like the War of 1812. We're also going to talk about tariffs and look at and also this big thing called the American system. So a lot of ground to cover in 4.3. So let's get started. Our guiding question: how and why did regional interests affect debates over the role of the federal government in the early Republic? We're going to begin today by looking at one of those kind of forgotten wars in American history, the War of 1812. It's often overlooked because it's between the Revolution and the Civil War, and it's not a very exciting war in the sense that we're not, fighting for independence, or we're not invading, some empire overseas or something. It's kind of bland, but it's also a war that's going to have a lot of effects. So we're going to focus more on the effects than the causes, but we do need to talk a little bit about the causes. So if you recall, in our last video, we were talking about the British and the French both threatening our trade. The British in particular were impressing our sailors. They were still doing that. They were also giving arms to Native Americans on the frontier with the hopes that they would antagonize us and weaken us and strengthen the British cause in Canada. Now, into this environment steps a new generation of senators and politicians that we're going to call them the war hawks. These were men who were not, they were not founding fathers. They're kind of like the next generation. They're younger and they're ambitious, and they want to punish Britain for impressment, but also the antagonizing the Indians on the frontier. And their goal is to declare war on Britain and then take Canada. On to Canada was their slogan. Two of these guys we're going to talk a lot about in the coming days and weeks. John C. Calhoun of South Carolina and Henry Clay of Kentucky. So now that we know what the war was all about, basically the British are ticking us off and we feel we have to respond, so we declare war on them. Let's now look at the effects. So we declared war on the British. What do we do next? Well, on to Canada was the cry, so on to Canada we go. We invade Canada in 1812 and then again in 1813, both times largely failures. We win a couple battles here and there, yes, but we don't actually take Canada as a possession. So this is kind of a big setback for us. We do defend ourselves against a couple of British invasions, although one of these does not go so well for us, and famously the British do capture Washington, D.C., at least temporarily anyways, and set fire to much of the city, including the White House there you can see in front of us. Other than that, one other battle to mention, this would be a British siege and bombardment of Fort McHenry near Baltimore. And on board a British ship watching this unfold was a guy named Francis Scott Key. And he was inspired by seeing the rockets' red glare and the bombs bursting in air to write a poem that was later set to music. And we've got ourselves a national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. In fact, that is the Star-Spangled Banner, the flag that Francis Scott Key saw standing tall over Fort McHenry and refusing to surrender. Actually, there is one more battle we need to talk about. I misled you there. This is a very important battle for a couple of reasons. It takes place in January of 1815. Down in New Orleans. Basically, the British were attempting to take the city. They land thousands of soldiers there, and the commander in charge with the defense of New Orleans is one Andrew Jackson. And he assembles a motley crew of militia, of regular army, freed slaves, even some pirates, just anybody and everybody can hold a gun. And they absolutely mowed down the British as the British advance on the American positions. This victory was a big one. It is going to, once word spreads about this stunning victory, American nationalism and self-confidence just go through the roof. And of course, it makes Andrew Jackson a national hero, and one day would help him get to the presidency. Now, another reason that battle was interesting is that over in Europe, negotiations had been underway between Americans and the British, and they had signed the Treaty of Ghent on December 24th, 1814. And basically, the treaty said, let's go back to the way that things were before the war. In Latin, that's status quo ante bellum. Basically, let's return anything we've taken from each other and just go back to normal. Now, this date, if you look, not only is it, Christmas Eve, but notice the date. Let's go back to the Battle of New Orleans. That battle took place after the treaty was signed, but of course, things took so long to travel across the Atlantic back then, these men didn't know that the war had already ended. So this battle really didn't have to happen. But nonetheless, it did, and it made Andrew Jackson a hero. All right, some other effects of the War of 1812. Federalists in New England had been very upset about this war. In the first place, they didn't want the war. They felt it really endangered their trade and prosperity. So they continued to trade illegally, to smuggle things into Canada, which happens to be our enemy, which is, kind of treasonous. The Federalists even talk about secession. So once again, New England talking about secession. Not the first time they've done that. And things get so bad that Federalists hold this thing called the Hartford Convention in Hartford, Connecticut, and they draw up a list of demands for the federal government. This is almost kind of a threat, like if you don't give in to our demands, we'll just leave. Now, they arrive with these demands shortly after word had returned about this great victory in New Orleans, and they look kind of foolish because they're making demands and the war is going so well all of a sudden, and it basically backfires and helps kill off the Federalist Party. Other effects of the war. So America had taken on Britain yet again. We didn't win, we didn't lose, but if you didn't lose, I guess it's kind of a win. And we gained more respect. There's this surge of nationalism and pride. Andrew Jackson, William Henry Harrison come out of the war as heroes, and both men will later become president. All right, now we're going to look at something called the American system. So I want you to think, how could the government make foreign goods more expensive, thus protecting U.S. manufacturers from foreign competition? And the answer, of course, is a tariff. So in 1816, just the year after the War of 1812 ends, the U.S. passes a new tariff. And this is interesting because tariffs had existed before, but tariffs had always been a source of revenue, not necessarily for protection. This one was designed specifically to protect American industrialists. And the goal here, again, to make foreign goods more expensive so people would buy American. And this is going to begin a long trend of protective tariffs that we will follow all the way up until basically the turn of the century. Now, there are some exceptions to this, but in general, the North tended to be more pro-tariff because they're more industrialized, therefore they would benefit from this. The South tended to be more anti-tariff because they didn't have a lot of industry to protect, plus this would make foreign goods they purchase more expensive. So you already see kind of a regional tension thing going on here over the tariff, something we will explore more as the 1800s roll on. Now, the American system, what was it? Well, the American system is the brainchild of Henry Clay, one of those war hawks we talked about a couple minutes ago, a senator from Kentucky, a strong nationalist. He believed that America could be prosperous if we do a couple of things. Number one, create a strong banking system. So that would be a national bank, of course. This would provide credit to people who want to open businesses, and it would just generally kind of jumpstart the economy. Number two, more protective tariffs like the Tariff of 1816. These will protect American industries and provide the government with revenue. Number three, we need to build roads and canals. This will better increase trade inside the country, allow goods and people to flow more quickly, and will also tie the different regions of America together. Now, the American system, guys, is not a law. It's kind of like an idea, and it never is put into place in whole. Different pieces will be put into place separately, but this doesn't become one big, the act of the American system or something. It's not like that. It's more like we'll kind of pick and choose things we will do. So before railroads, guys, canals were really the way to move heavy goods long distances, because roads tended to be muddy, kind of just impassable sometimes. And canals, of course, while being slow, are still faster over the long haul, because they're not going to, other than maybe freezing over in the winter, basically weather doesn't, matter to a canal. You just keep on going with your heavy goods, long distances. Now, roads, that was a part of this, if you recall, and a lot of eastern states were rather suspicious of building these new roads. And one reason was that they were fearful, with roads heading west, that some of their population would then head west, and it would rob the eastern states of influence and also some of their workforce. So they were kind of reluctant to build any of these roads heading west. All right, well, let's go back to politics now and talk about what's known as the era of good feelings. And to understand the era of good feelings, we have to think about the election of 1816. If you recall, the Federalist Party had kind of gotten a jump in the kind of a jump start, a little shot in the arm, and then it basically rapidly dies off. You can see this will be basically the last election we'll see any Federalists winning at all. And James Monroe, our last founding father president, is going to win in 1816 overwhelmingly. Now, after taking office, James Monroe takes what we call a goodwill tour. So basically go across the country, visit towns, shake hands, make speeches, and that kind of stuff. And when he arrives in Boston, a newspaper there declared that an era of good feelings had arrived. Now, the fact that this is a Boston newspaper, right, the most, Boston being one of the most hardcore Federalist places on planet Earth, for them to sort of like happily declare that there's an era of good feelings for a president from the other party was tremendous. And so it really says that we only have one political party going forward, at least for a while. All right, now let's get into the Missouri Compromise. This is a huge deal on the way to the Civil War. We're going to look at the causes first and then the effects. So, between 1791 and 1819, there were 9 new states added to the Union. In general, what would happen is we would admit these kind of alternatively, free versus slave. So you kind of keep a balance between your free states and your slave states. And that's important because regardless of population, if you can keep the same number of states in each camp, then the Senate would be tied. And therefore, any potential law, either limiting slavery or even abolishing slavery, could basically be killed in the Senate. So the South has to keep the same number of states as free states. That was their big goal here. So in 1819, Missouri applies to Congress for statehood as a slave state. Now, this is a big deal because, as we just talked about, the South has to maintain equality in the Senate. They know they're losing the population battle with the North, so they're always going to be outnumbered in the House, but if they can maintain equality or maybe even supremacy in the Senate, they can protect slavery. Now, the North, of course, was rather upset about this. They don't like the idea of the South having an extra senator, and actually extra 2 senators, of course. And so a compromise is needed. And into this steps Henry Clay, Mr. American System, Mr. Warhawk of Kentucky, and he's going to hammer out a compromise. And this is not the last time he's going to do it. In fact, his nickname is the Great Compromiser because he's going to do this a lot. Well, let's look at the effects of this Compromise of 1820, also known as the Missouri Compromise. It's 3 compromises in one. Number 1, Missouri will be let in as a slave state. Number 2, Maine will be let in as a free state. Yes, Maine was not a state. It had been part of Massachusetts this whole time. And furthermore, we're going to put a line on the map. 36 degrees, 30 minutes north latitude, or 3630 for short. We're going to say this will be the barrier. So above this line, no slavery, with the exception, of course, of Missouri. So we're going to put a firm line right here saying no more slavery. Now, as you can imagine, if you look at that line, that doesn't give the South very far to go, and so that is only going to encourage them to want more land out here. So that's kind of a preview of the Mexican War we'll get to a little bit later. So there you go, the Missouri Compromise. This will keep the balance in the Senate. It will put a limit on where slavery can be, and both sides can calm down. But we haven't really solved the problem of the expansion of slavery, and all we're doing is kind of delaying the inevitable, which will, of course, be the Civil War. So, just to summarize what I just said, we're going to preserve the political balance. It only postpones the final showdown, and it does close off the possibility of slavery north of Missouri. So there you go. That's the Missouri Compromise. A huge deal, guys. Make sure you know the ins and outs of the Compromise of 1820, or the Missouri Compromise, as it's also known, because chances are you're going to see a question about the road to the Civil War, and you'll need to know about this step on that direction. All right, that was it for 4.3. I know that was a lot of information. It's a big section, but we covered all kinds of debates over regional interests and some of the goals of the federal government in the early republic. Remember about the American system, the Compromise of 1820, causes and effects of the War of 1812, all that stuff, guys. Make sure you know it. All right, I'll come at you with the next video in just a little bit.